Okay. And I'm very happy also to send the slides to anyone who want to have them. So please just feel free to drop me an email. Even generally, if you want to speak further about what we'll discuss today, there is my email. Please feel free to get in touch whenever you can and whenever you want. And please also, as we go along, don't hesitate to stop me or raise your hand. If I don't see it, I'm sure Gustav will. Please interrupt. Please jump in at any time and make an intervention or a contribution as you see fit. Okay, so as a kind of a broader introduction, I think we need to acknowledge that the entire Earth system has emerged as a new scale of and a context for governance in the Anthropocene. And I assume that most of you are probably more or less acquainted with the concept of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is this new human-dominated geological epoch, still not official, but in the process of being declared as such, where humans and human activity are seen to overwhelm and severely disrupt the harmony and stability of Earth system processes. So in a nutshell, basically what the Anthropocene tells us is that humans have become a true geological force of nature, in a sense, very similar to volcanoes, for example. I think importantly, when we talk about human power in the Anthropocene, and as a precondition to everything that we'll talk about today, we need to acknowledge that it's not all humans having the same impact on Earth. The human impact is very much differentiated. For example, poor women and children living in the global south who suffer the most from climate change that is caused by richer people in more developed countries have a far lesser impact on the Earth system than people, for example, living in the global north. So when talking about the human in the Anthropocene, one must always be very critical and careful of nuanced approaches when one uses these terms. But having said this, I think that that this new scale of the Earth system, this new governance scale of the Earth system, is revealing really a range of complex challenges for global governance. And it's also opening up new epistemic pathways in search of global sustainability governance and solutions. And we see this very, very clearly in much of the work that the Earth System Governance Network does and its scholars do. Notably in the work of Frank Biermann, the founder of the network. The Anthropocene-centered Earth system perspective, I think, suggests also that our Holocene-premised institutions, the Holocene is still the official geological epoch, and these regulatory institutions, such as law, that have been created in the Holocene context, are ill-equipped to better understand and to address the worsening predicaments of the Anthropocene, notably within a complex Earth system context. In view of this Earth system perspective, the boundaries between humans and non-humans are becoming very much blurred. And the world has become also increasingly tele-coupled or interconnected. The plastic that we use, for example, in Germany, for example, has a very direct relationship to destruction of the Amazon rainforest, where trees are being felled for the propagation of biofuels, for example. So we see this interconnectedness in planetary processes, consumption patterns all across the world. And we also see that planetary risks have become globally networked through interacting planetary boundaries, the very famous framework that has been proposed by Johan Rockström and his colleagues. And I think that this interconnectivity highlights the challenges that global governance interventions face and are increasingly going to face in responding to the cascading risks that are deeply embedded in complex, multi-scalar, and causally linked relationship. So the Anthropocene in a nutshell, requires of us to rethink global governance challenges and effective responses to these challenges with a much more holistic understanding of the Earth system as a single intertwined socio-ecological system. And one pertinent issue certainly that requires critical reflection is how normative systems, such as law, could embrace an Earth system perspective. Because up to date, the primary part of law responsible for these concerns has been environmental law. And in much of the work that we've been doing in the task force on Earth system law, we have tried to highlight the inadequacies of the environmental law framework to address Earth system challenges. Now, certainly in the field of environmental law, concepts such as, you might have heard of these, ecological law, sustainability law, Earth-centered law, there's Earth jurisprudence and wild law, Anthropocene law, planetary boundaries law, and even feminist, queer, and post-human ecological law have all been seeking to transcend these traditional framings of law and the role of law in mediating human behavior amidst a very deeply complex Earth system. But I think that these emerging efforts still remain disjointed, and many more interrogations regarding the difficulties posed to law in thinking with the Earth system, as it were, in trying to align itself and its objective and its ontologies and its ethics and its mechanics with the Earth system remain to be explored. Now, such efforts, I would suggest, need a shared epistemic framework, a research framework, a framework of thinking about the future of law in the Anthropocene that could enable and enhance collaborative, intradisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary research and co-learning that go hand in hand with a very thorough transdisciplinary stakeholder engagement to allow for a scholarly understanding of what makes law more sensitive and responsive to Earth system governance challenges. And in a paper that will appear in a couple of weeks, I, together with other colleagues that are all part of the Earth System Governance Network and the Task Force on Earth System Law, have been trying to think about what are some of these intradisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary challenges for law in the context of the Earth system. And to explore how Earth system law could provide a shared epistemic framework for all of us, including yourselves who are present here today, to work together in developing the area of Earth system law. So I want us today to talk about the potential, certainly, of Earth system law to facilitate interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and intradisciplinary engagement and co-learning. And we will first look at what Earth system law means, and then we will explore each one of these three elements as we go along. Before I proceed, are there any questions for now? So Gustav has also mentioned, please feel free to pose questions. I would invite you to do the same. Anything currently? Any interventions? Please do feel free. Good. Okay. So what is Earth system law? So formally introduced in 2019 in a paper that Rakim and I wrote. There's a little picture of it on the screen. Earth system law aims to align law with the Earth system in the simplest of terms. Because it is an evolving notion, there are different views on what Earth system law is. And since its introduction in 2019, there have been several propositions and different perspectives that we've seen coming from various scholars. And I would they, for example, show you some of the emerging state of the art. We can look forward to a special issue on Earth System Law that will appear during the course of December in Earth System Governance, which is the specialist journal of the Earth System Governance Network. Frank Bierman is the editor-in-chief. So we have currently around 6 papers that's already been accepted and will appear there. All open access, free to download. So please go ahead as soon as it's published and let us know what you think of what we've done there. And there's a few other publications as well, which we've also listed, by the way, on the website of the Task Force on Earth System Law, which you see there. So just go to the normal webpage of the Earth System Governance Network, and you'll find all of the information of the task force there as well. We even have a Twitter account, which you can follow, and we warmly invite you to do that. And if you have any interest in becoming, this is the sales pitch, if you have any interest in becoming a member of the task force, you are more than welcome to email either me or my dear colleague, Catherine Blanchard at Utrecht University, so that we can include you in the task force. It's as simple as just sending an email and saying, I want to be part of this. There we go. Thanks, Gustav, also for sharing that. So what is Earth System Law? Let's just get back to that. I think that there is some agreement within, sorry, let's just go back to that one. I think there's some agreement that Earth System Law is not so much a new body of law that regulates a specific issue, such as, for example, environmental law that regulates environmental issues, or contract law that regulates contracts, or human rights law that pertains to human rights issues. Although it could become that in time. I think our idea behind Earth System Law is rather that it's a new way of thinking about the role, purpose, objectives, and the design of law in the Anthropocene. And that specifically draws on the Earth System context. So very much like the idea of Earth System governance is a new way of thinking about governance in the Anthropocene alongside an Earth System perspective. So the development of Earth System Law, certainly to us, was a response to what we thought was law's continued inability to fully align itself and to embrace Earth System complexity. Because law is premised on assumptions of Holocene stability, and it could often take for granted the presence of non-human world and the ecological systems in which human societies are embedded. And its institutional success came and still comes most straightforwardly in the forms of rules or informal arrangements to control access. But it has never really embraced the ecological dynamism of the Earth system. And such a reductionist approach that is based on Holocene stability, I think, has become really, really problematic. So Earth System Law instead, I think, explicitly revolves on an Earth System perspective that fully embraces the regulatory concerns of the Earth System governance framework. And Gustav has told me that you've already gone through what the research agenda, at least, is of this network. So many of the aspects that are dealt with within this framework, we try to tackle the legal dimensions of those through the work that we do in the task force. So to this end, Earth System Law discards the notion of Holocene stability, and it tries to rethink law's systems approach in the light of the functioning of the Earth system itself and the multiple governance challenges that arises from this complex systems perspective. So Earth System Law therefore fully embraces the Earth system's key characteristics such as interconnectedness, unpredictability, instability, and complexity. And let's be honest, this is a difficult thing for law to do, because what is one of the main purposes of law is to provide certainty, predictability, and clarity, especially insofar as the regulation of human relationships are concerned. So we are almost basically asking of law to do something that it is not has not really been inherently designed to do in the first place. And this systems approach that we are suggesting is emerging in dialogue, both with Earth system science, which is natural science-based, and Earth system governance, which is obviously much more embedded in the social sciences domain. But it is also informed by insights from the literature critiquing the ontology and the epistemology of modernist law in the context of the Anthropocene trope. So the Earth system law framework advances a novel systems perspective, an approach that merges the systemic and complex nature of the Earth system and the legal system into a single operative framework. And in doing so, the framework allows us, epistemic travelers, to explore responses to Earth system-related regulatory implications of the Anthropocene, such as complexity, inclusivity, interdependencies, and the need certainly for radical transformations in the face of unprecedented socio-ecological decline at a planetary scale that we witness, for example, in the context of climate change. And such an exploration is guided by the evolving research agenda on Earth system law, which Rak and I have tried to describe a little bit in this paper that you see in front of you. Towards the end of the paper, we try and set out some suggestions of what we think could be an interesting research agenda for Earth system law and Earth system law scholars. And certainly this agenda highlights the contribution that Earth system law research could make to the 4 contextual conditions and the 5 research lenses of the Earth system governance framework. So before I proceed, are there any questions at this stage on the concept of Earth system law? I'd be very happy to.
Hello. I have a very quick question. Thank you, Louis. I was wondering how much does it also comprise the notion of this rights to nature and things like, especially like in Ecuador, Bolivia, they now integrate into law. So could you please also talk about that briefly? Thank you.
100%. I'm actually not going to talk about it briefly, but much more extensively in the 3rd part of the paper. So if you just hang on for 5 minutes, we'll get there. But it very much relates to that, I promise. I suspect that you are working on these issues, so I would be very interested to hear what you say about our suggestions.
And my question in the chat is related as well, so maybe I'll wait to hear what you have to say, because you'll probably answer it anyway.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else? Nothing? Okay, there'll be other opportunities as well as we proceed. So let's tackle the first one. The first issue on intradisciplinarity first. So but before we do so, just a little bit of context. I think the question that I really want to ask today is how can the Earth system law framework open up new transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary epistemic pathways that seek to make law more sensitive to and reflective of the functioning of the Earth system as a single social ecological system. And I think that for law to become embedded in and aligned with the Earth system, we will need to enable a systems approach to law and its epistemologies. And I think this is important to remember, through more intensive co-learning and epistemic alliances. So we would need to co-learn from each other, and we would need to create alliances across and within disciplines to try and understand how law in the Anthropocene can better address Earth system governance challenges. And that is the main point that I really want to make today. And I say this because I think that this will happen in the context of and as a response to 3 main challenges, which is briefly outlined in front of you. First, I don't know how many legal scholars we have here, but if they are legal scholars, I think that you'll agree with me that Legal scholars often confine their research within their specific areas of specialization, isn't it? Such as environmental law, criminal law, property law, tort law. I am, for example, mostly an environmental lawyer, and I know very, very little about contract law. Our faculties have also been created and set up in a way that reinforces these siloed boundaries. You've got a department of commercial law, department of public law, for example, and so forth and so forth. So intradisciplinary research collaborations within law and among lawyers are few, and often when they occur, they result from haphazard interactions. Second, I question whether law and lawyers is apt to engage with other disciplines situated in the humanities, social sciences, and more particularly, the natural sciences, since a thorough interdisciplinary dialogue still seems to be very much in its infancy when it comes to trying understanding complex earth system governance challenges and legal ways to respond to these challenges. And third, and this would certainly get to the, to the point on rights of nature, is that legal scholarship does not yet fully engage with a wide range of stakeholders in a way that could initiate and sustain positive change to the realities of those stakeholders in the context of a rapidly changing earth system. So in sum, I think that we need to see greater connections within approaches to law as well as with other disciplines, and a radical reimagination of the subjects of law, including non-humans, which we'll turn to in a little while. So let's first look at that first bullet, reaching out to other branches of law. So the study and practice of law, certainly for those who are not lawyers, might be interesting to note that is marked by ever-growing specialization, with a wide range of increasingly narrowly defined branches of law emerging, such as business law, criminal law, human rights law, environmental law, the list is endless. And these specializations of law have in themselves become even further specialized over time. We see this, for example, with environmental law, which is subdivided into different issue areas, such as climate law, biodiversity law, global oceans law, energy law, and so forth. And each of these areas have developed their own internal logic and set of institutions. For example, the complex body of climate law is perhaps the most famous example at the international, regional, domestic, and even now the urban and subnational levels is absolutely astounding. And it consists of a range of norms ranging from hard law to soft law that are crafted and implemented by numerous actors, including legislators, courts. We see this now with climate litigation, the famous agenda decision, Neubauer, currently in Germany, that was heard a couple of months ago, but also corporations and civil society. So this is, of course, good, because if the legal discipline can show that it is expanding by creating different subfields, it is obviously evidence also of the growth of that discipline, but it also has downsides. And I think that law's increased silos are most problematic in the context of interconnected planetary socio-ecological governance challenges, as Victor Gallas has also shown. For example, one can study the regulatory design of market-based climate policies, such as renewable energy subsidies or carbon pricing, but without an analysis of how larger bodies of diverse legal laws, including, for example, investment law, corporate law, and so forth, support the fossil fuel-based economy, our understanding of the cumulative and collective role in achieving climate goals will remain limited. We will have to take a much broader view. In other words, climate law won't solve the climate crisis as such. we will need a much broader set of legal norms to address the climate crisis much more effectively. A siloed approach may also overlook the role of law in preventing and even causing problem shifting. Because where we create one legal regime, as Rakyum Kim has shown in his work, we often shift the problems merely to another regime. The renewable energy regime that, for example, also propagates the development of biofuels and so forth, is merely now shifting the problem of deforestation in the Amazon forest to the biodiversity regime. So we need to be cognizant of those possibilities. So the increased specialization in the legal discipline is a natural and a necessary process. But the deeply complex and often existential questions of multi-scalar complex socio-ecological problems must, I think, be addressed now more than ever before in a much more coherent, collective, and holistic way by the entire legal system and all its subdisciplines. And we need to start realizing that.
Okay, so I think there was a lot about the intradisciplinarity of law, and maybe we can now take an opportunity to see if there's any questions to Lewis in respect to this. I noticed that Cynthia, you have written a question here in chat, and maybe this is something that may relate to this particular component of disciplinarity. So if you want to read that out, please do.
May I question to him?
Ah, yes,
Thank
please,
you.
Cynthia. Hi.
Okay, thank you, Luis. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Okay, I have one question. In some countries, I think that, for example, Central American, there are many issues to adapt the legal framework, environmental framework, to this new lens. For example, earth system governance states. Sometimes it's impossible to introduce new concepts as Anthropocene into law. And I'm wondering, how can I do, or how can contribute, our academic contribute to overcome these obstacles in this legal framework in this specific region, Central America? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is a hugely relevant and important question, because I think it is a struggle that not only you have, it is a struggle that we all have all across the world. Certainly in South Africa and Africa, where I'm from, but also in Europe. It's the problem is that on the one hand, you have eager, innovative, excited scientists, scholars, students, people like us who talk to each other today, who are thinking about these interesting ideas. And the big challenge then is how to get these innovative ideas translated into political and legislative processes. How do we get this taken up in the more formal processes that actually makes the difference? And we will also get to that a little bit later when we speak about multi-stakeholder involvement. But I think the first way to do this, certainly from a developing country perspective, such as in Latin America, is to share the research that you and I do in a palatable, congestible way, understandable way, with, for example, just a local councillor in the city municipality where you live, to write policy briefs, to have community engagement events, and to follow a type of a bottom-up approach where your ideas that you've developed in your research and scholarship can be shared with other stakeholders. And then one can only hope that these ideas could kind of be absorbed into the more formal and higher level processes. I can just give you one example. The term Anthropocene does not appear, at least as far as I know, in any international environmental treaty. The concept of planetary boundaries which have been already proposed in 2009, has only now emerged hesitantly in European Union law. So these processes often take an extremely long time for our ideas and novel concepts that we think about to be introduced in the more formal processes. But I would certainly encourage you then to keep working and to explore from a bottom-up way how you can introduce these broader concepts into the more formal processes. And one way of doing it is to become, for example, a member of this network, because your ideas get spread among a community of like-minded people. And this network in particular, the largest social science network working with Earth system governance challenges in the world, has a lot of potential also to further disseminate and enhance the impact of what you have to say and we have to say collectively to multiple stakeholders out there. So in short, the fact that you are here today is already a very, very good starting point. I hope that answers your question. So there is from Lisa, can you speak a little bit about the policy implementation gap in relation to Earth system changes? How can law be more adaptive to be consistent with climate and biodiversity, and that maybe on shorter times because we're more swift action? That is a difficult question. And I think that this is I certainly don't have an answer right and ready. What I can say is there is obviously a huge divide between what the law is, setting out the ideal, and how it is implemented, if it's implemented at all. In many countries where there is very little rule of law, for example, this remains a perennial concern. But in developed countries, such as in Germany, for example, we now see, in the face of the increasingly severe climate crisis, that the courts are stepping in to tell government, this is what you need to do with respect to your climate policies. The law is there, you need to implement it. So we see the increased engagement with legal and other actors that are coming on board that are forcing governments and corporations to actually observe the law. And I think one must not underestimate the power of civil society movements. Let's just talk about the Fridays for Future movement, Greta Thunberg, which in terms of representative liberal democracy, that movement hasn't a lot of legitimacy, but it is an extremely powerful movement to change exactly the type of institutions that are making the formal decisions on how the law should look and how it should be implemented and if it is implemented. So I think there's also a lot to say in favor of throwing our energy and weight behind promoting broader civil society movements in support of bridging the policy implementation gap. On how law can be more adaptive to be consistent with climate and biodiversity changes. Again, I think the first step would be to recognize that law is not sufficiently adaptive. That would be a very good start, because lawyers don't recognize that yet. We would probably need to be more flexible in terms of the type of measures that we provide for in international climate law, regional laws, and also in our local laws, certainly in urban climate laws and policies. And it is in this sense also that an interdisciplinary co-learning experience could very much help law to become more adaptive to a changing climate. And we'll get to this in exactly the next section. And Daniel asked, do you think that the increased specializations and silos in law are actually needed and in fact contribute to the argument of Earth system? I mean, I don't think that I'm arguing that we need to do away with the silos and the subdisciplines in law, those are very necessary still. We can't just speak of law. Law, of course, is a discipline, but it inevitably requires some form of specialization. The trick here is to try and better coordinate these so that they can collectively address challenges of an intertwined Earth system. I hope that answers the question. So it is not doing away with the silos, it is better connecting this. And I think a way to think about better connecting all of the silos is by using the Earth system law framework. So let's turn to the second issue, reaching out to other disciplines. I think there are at least 3 reasons why interdisciplinarity has become necessary for responding to complex Earth system governance challenges. First, where different disciplinary knowledge is combined, new knowledge and discoveries can be created beyond the scope of a single discipline. So the added value of such an iterative efforts is particularly evident in the context of very complex, wicked problems such as climate change. Climate change cannot be only addressed by law, it must be addressed by a range of other disciplines. And it's also to the benefit of law, to get back to one of the earlier questions, to be informed by other disciplines so that it can learn from those disciplines how to become more adaptive, how to become more reflexive, how to become more responsive to ever-changing circumstances, both ecological and social, in the light of climate change. And second, as disciplines challenge each other's orthodoxy, blind spots within otherwise separate disciplines can be addressed and corrected. For example, where behavioral economics challenge traditional rational actor assumptions. And the third benefit of interdisciplinarity is that sharing diverse data and knowledge certainly enables individual disciplines to be informed by and bolster their own research agendas. For example, using history to contextualize statutory or constitutional provisions. Now, the legal discipline is not only fragmented internally, it also suffers from interdisciplinary fragmentation. And I think that the siloed nature of academic disciplines prevents us from adopting novel systems-oriented regulatory approaches that we really need in the Anthropocene. I think we should be concerned with interdisciplinary interactions that seek to integrate techniques, perspectives, concepts, and theories from more than one discipline to develop knowledge in a way that is beyond the capacity of one single discipline. So I'm going to keep this very short. This is more than lawyers simply joining with scientists, engineers, or historians to pursue some social or ecological goals in an interactive but independent manner. And it goes much deeper and beyond the long history of traditional legal research that rely on other disciplines, such as history and psychology and so forth. These shallow interdisciplinary endeavors, I think, have been observed in the past. And law and geography and law and science and technology studies are only 2 examples that have emerged as spaces for trying to destabilizing these disciplinary demarcations. But despite these developments, most have really been narrowly defined among self-contained areas of specialization, certainly. And I think that our idea of interdisciplinarity involves a much deeper integration of disciplinary perspectives. Are there any questions right now? Before we move on to the third part? I suspect the third part might be the most interesting because it also involves rights of nature and all of these other lovely, interesting stuff that law deals with. Okay, let's move on and then we can have a bit of time for a Q&A towards the end. I'll try to finish up quickly so that we still have a bit of time to chat. So in addition to intradisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, law will have to open up to a much wider range of social actors to retain legitimacy, both as a social regulatory institution and to increase its legitimacy and ultimately to enhance its effectiveness to respond to Earth system governance challenges. And Earth system law, I think, requires a shift of ontological and epistemological premises to realize law's very much long overdue reimagination in the context of the Anthropocene. So in terms of ontological assumptions, subjects of Earth system law should be expanded, to get back to the question on rights of nature, to a greater range of social actors, to better reflect, I think, the entangled, intertwined, interconnected being of vulnerable human and non-human, living and non-human and non-living entities in the Earth system. In other words, law will have to cease to have the human as its main referent. Law will have to open itself up to embrace, both in terms of its subject and its protective mandate, to embrace the non-human as well. And I think to embrace such a radical ontology, we must ask ourselves questions such as, who belongs to communities of justice in the Anthropocene? Is it only humans? Is it only particular humans? Can it be non-humans? Can it be future human beings? So I think important here is to rethink the subject of law. Who counts for law's benefits? Is it only the human or a particular human? And I think we can also ask questions of how can law address the entire living order's shared but differentially distributed vulnerability in the face of accelerating Earth system transformations. And answering such questions involves acknowledging law's necessary extension, and this is really the point here, to those beings situated in the physical, biological, social, and even the mental worlds comprising the Earth system. If you read some of the articles that have already been published in our special issue on Earth system law, Joshua Gellers, for example, is making an interesting case for the extension of law's protection to artificial intelligence and robots, which is fairly profound and extremely radical and definitely worth a read. And this is exactly what this opening up to other stakeholders involves. We must try to be as radical as possible. It will certainly require a very deliberate rejection of law's prevailing and very deeply systemically embedded Cartesian dualism, the separation between the human and the non-human. And I think that recognizing the fundamental inseparability from the Earth system in which they are embedded, entangled, intertwined humans and non-human beings and entities find themselves increasingly occupying a plane of shared vulnerability. We are all vulnerable in the Anthropocene. That is what the Anthropocene tells us. But some are more vulnerable than others and might require more or better legal protection. So practically speaking, this shift in legal thinking would allow the introduction of certain legal subjects who has thus far enjoyed limited or nascent recognition in constitutions and courts around the world, such as nature, non-human beings, and future generations. I think one of the most clearest examples of a court actually embracing the interests of future generations is the recent decision of the German Constitutional Court in Neubauer versus Germany, in the April decision of the court. And this could be, there's an official English translation if you wish to read it. It's a wonderful, wonderful text to read, to see the extent to which a court in the climate context has been able and willing to go to embrace the concerns of future human beings. So as Earth system laws certainly will have to reject environmental laws, deeply entrenched neoliberal growth premises, which are all deeply embedded in concepts such as sustainable development. Let's be honest, sustainable development, despite or because of the fact even that it is the central principle of environmental law, is not a social ecologically friendly principle. Sustainable development legitimizes extractive industries and predatory practices that are all associated with endless growth on a limited planet, that are all driven mostly, certainly, by lobbying, corporate interests, and so forth. And I think that there are already examples of law following a different type of process, where it opens up to other ways of being, to other ways of seeing, to other ways of understanding, of knowing, of co-learning. And we see this, for example, in the emergence of indigenous onto epistemology, such as Pachamama, even concepts such as Ubuntu, rights of nature, rights of trees, rights of rivers. And this is an important development, certainly. And law would also have to open up itself, and I want to conclude with this, to the co-production of knowledge with numerous actors, while not necessarily legal experts, also to get back to the earlier point, but lawyers certainly will have to get off our high pedestals and really get our hands dirty and engage with people and stakeholders and other social actors at a level where it really, really matters. And the old channels of distribution, often elitist and exclusionary, academic writings in books that no one can buy, for example, law reports, law gazettes, digital documents, and so forth, are all still necessary, but insufficient to make real changes on the ground. And we will have to think very cleverly about new forms of outreach, from social media to robots, artificial intelligence. See again Josh Gallus's article in the special issue, and so forth. Because all of this will be needed to cultivate trustworthy and widespread awareness of the outcomes that should ideally be associated with wider stakeholder engagement.
Okay, Lewis, thank you so much. So much food for thought. I think I hope I speak for everyone when my brain is firing various directions at this stage. So I do want to invite the participants. First, we had Shahana and Sebi. Do you feel like your questions were answered in that third part? If not, Shahana, you're nodding. Sebi, if you want to add something, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I suppose just the last point about how we develop a co-relational Earth system law, in particular with non-humans. How would we involve these stakeholders in forming new laws for Earth system governance law, given the species language barrier? How would, I don't know if you know of any very alternative programs that are looking at this kind of thing.
Well, there are certainly, I think it is a very important question, and I think it is a question to which very few people already have an answer to. What I know is happening is obviously the speaking on behalf of nature. So you would have, as you would probably also know, legal counsel representing nature and so forth, the rights of nature tribunals that we see popping up around the world. The fracking tribunals, climate change tribunals. It's just all these people, civil society-based tribunals, people speaking for nature. I think we still have a very long way to go. And we've also posed ourselves that question when we worked on this paper on, are we actually saying that we need to involve, let's just put it plainly, my pet dog in participating in saying what type of law she would like to have governing her health. And I don't think that we are even at that creative and radical stage yet. But that certainly is a point for further exploration. And I would love to see an answer to that if one could start tracing out the direction of the possibilities of including non-humans within actual decision-making processes and within processes of deliberative democracy. And again, I suspect the answer won't lie in law. I think the answer will lie in other disciplines.
Thank you for that, Louis. And I see we have a hand raised from Pablo and then Shahana. I think that will be the end of it. We only have a few minutes left, so hopefully we can be brief. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gustav. I think there was a question before me from Thais Ribeiro in the chat. I think it's better to answer that one, and then if I could answer, pose a question if we still have time to do that.
Thank you, Pablo. Yeah, Thais, please go ahead then, if you are with us. Otherwise, I'll read it out.
Yes, hello. Okay, I'll just read it really quickly so Pablo will have time also. So for me, the concept of Earth system law that was presented seems to make a normative global call for a broader imaginary and recognizing the Anthropocene and its impacts. However, the implementation seems to be more localized at the national level. And we have very diverse legal systems. So how we are going to operate this? We have specific decisions at national level, which then will amount to a global change, or what will happen? Because I'm talking about the point of view in what is happening in Brazil, for instance, and we have a very, very pessimistic now a perception of this kind of change happening. Like we are actually losing rights instead of advancing rights. So how do you see this level thing?
Well, certainly Earth system law as such does not provide an answer to the challenges that Brazil is currently experiencing. And it also doesn't provide an answer as such to, or gives a solution to what's happening in Southern Africa for that matter with climate change. But it does, as you say, and I think that is correct, call for a broader legal reimaginary of law, of what law could be in the Anthropocene. It is not necessarily global. It is at all of these levels. It is international, regional, domestic, and even subnational at the urban level. And I think that is also an important component of its systems approach, is that it embraces very deliberately a multi-level perspective. So you can easily apply the fundamental idea behind Earth system law, also at a very local level, because there's also Earth system changes in the Amazon, for example, within local cities in Brazil. So it is more about the idea that Earth system law presents and the opportunity that it presents to you, or us rather, to think of how can we follow, how can we see the things that we need to govern in an integrated way, and how can law address all of these integrated issues in a coherent way that speaks to one another. I think that is more the point. I hope I answer your question. Okay, excellent.
Thank you. Pablo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Gustav. I'll do it as quick as I can. Well, apologies for my level of English. I hope that I can pose my question in a way that is understandable. Very quickly, a quick note is that I'm quite skeptical about the language of rights regarding ecosystems and social ecological systems, because I suspect that it's a simple-minded solution and it doesn't reflect, or it is not capable of reflect this complexity, this legal instrument. So perhaps we might think better regarding nature in a way that as a cohabitated system, because sometimes we think that law has the solution of everything to everything, and maybe this language of rights, it's not the best way to solve our relation with the rest of the species and the biogeochemical processes and the ecological processes that we depend from.
Thank you, Pablo. Pablo is also a lawyer, and I've met him before. It's lovely that you can join us. And I absolutely fully agree with you, is that we must be very careful when using the language of human rights. And I think there's two papers that I did a couple of years ago critiquing the use of human rights language. And I was in a discussion yesterday also with Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, the former one, where even Philip admitted, where Professor Alston admitted that the human rights movement, important as it is, cannot and does not provide all the answers to the social ecological challenge that we are currently facing. They are playing an increasingly smaller role within the bigger scheme of things. And if you look at what's happening, and this is an important point that he made yesterday, if you look at the type of conversations and the content of the conversations that are being had at the international level, and you will see this in COP26 that's coming up, the climate COP, is that human rights are increasingly pushed to the fringes of the discussion. And I often think that human rights have been and are being co-opted, disingenuously so, by very powerful lobby interests, such as corporations and also states, to sugarcoat what they're actually doing. It is very much in the same way that green economy is used to, or sustainable development, to describe exploitative neoliberal development, but in green terms. So we should be very careful and wary of blindly trusting the potential of human rights alone to solve the crisis, because it won't and it can't.
Thank you very much, Luis. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. Yeah, it's great.
Thanks for being here.
Okay, so thank you. I think we have to call it. We're already 5 minutes over, and I'm of course conscious of everyone's busy schedules, or it's time to go to bed for some, and maybe some needs to go out and walk the dog for the morning walk. Regardless, it's really nice to have gone through the first part of the day with everyone. We do have the icebreaker and Petrakucha sessions for the later group today. We look forward to them. I think they will be in 2.5 hours, a little bit less now. Of course, we're running out of time. Mario, I see that you had a follow-up question. I think Shahana, maybe you had follow-up questions. But maybe Luis, you want to put the email to the task force in the chat, and I think you can always reach out. And if you do want get in contact with them, this is the way we try to do it within the project, is of course to have these task forces spaces where you can come and interact on certain ideas and topics which really speak to you. So with that said, for the ones that are leaving and are going to bed, we really look forward to see you at the futuring session tomorrow morning or afternoon in some cases. And lastly, I really want to thank Luis for coming in on short notice, and I just want to give a round of applause. So thank you very much, Luis.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day, and thank you for your wonderful contribution.